The red dust of Mars swirled outside, a constant, irritating reminder of the barren landscape that surrounded the Botanical Research Center. Inside, David Miller stared at a monitor displaying rows upon rows of genetically modified Martian potatoes, their purple tubers stubbornly refusing to become anything more exciting. He sighed, a long, drawn-out exhale that seemed to carry the weight of his past failures with it. At 34, he felt like a fossil, petrified in a landscape of controlled environments and predictable growth cycles. Another day, another potato, he muttered to himself, adjusting the spectacles perched on his nose. His messy brown hair, usually a point of pride back on Earth, was now perpetually flattened from the low-gravity environment. He swiveled his chair, the squeak of the aged metal a familiar soundtrack to his workday, and gazed out of the reinforced window. The simulated Earth sky, a pale imitation of the real thing, offered little comfort. He'd come to Mars seeking solace, a place to rebuild after his career as an astrophysicist imploded spectacularly. Instead, he'd become a glorified farmer, tending to crops that held all the allure of a particularly dull spreadsheet. A small chime from his wrist device pulled him back to reality. It was a notification from the remote monitoring system. "Let's see what new and exciting developments we have today," David said, injecting a heavy dose of sarcasm into his voice. He tapped the screen, bringing up a live feed from Sector Gamma, an area of the base that was usually off-limits to him. Sector Gamma was where that special research happened, a euphemism that still raised his eyebrows. The image on the monitor was blurry, a swirl of strange colors and shifting shapes. David frowned, adjusting the focus. And then, he saw it, a tall, slender form, its skin shimmering like an oil slick on water, with long, graceful tentacles that moved with an unnatural fluidity. It was like something out of a bad science fiction movie, or maybe a fever dream induced by too much instant coffee. "Well, that's certainly new," he murmured, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to be having some difficulty with a piece of equipment, a soil analyzer, of all things. One of its tentacles, a pale, iridescent blue, was caught in the machine, causing the whole thing to vibrate ominously. David watched, transfixed, as the creature struggled to free itself. It moved with a strange grace, its body undulating like a living sculpture. He realized it must be an XYLR, an aquatic species renowned for their intellect and, well, their tentacles. He'd read about them in his astrophysics days, but seeing one in person was a completely different experience. The XYLR had landed on Earth just 5 years before, their presence shaking human society to its core. David had never considered he'd ever meet one face-to-face. The creature emitted a series of high-pitched clicks and whistles, the sounds echoing faintly through the monitor's speakers. "Sounds like someone's having a bad day," David chuckled, his earlier boredom momentarily forgotten. Just as he was about to dismiss the situation as another oddity in his increasingly bizarre life, the monitor pinged again. This time, it was an incoming voice call. He hesitated, seeing the caller ID, Dr. Eleanor Vance, the head of the research base, and a woman who had the patience of a caffeine-deprived badger. "Miller," her voice barked through the speaker, "get your rear in gear. Report to Sector Gamma immediately." "What's going on, Dr. Vance?" David asked, already resigning himself to a less than thrilling day. "We have a minor issue with equipment maintenance, and you, with your supposedly extensive background in plant analysis, are the closest available." "Plant analysis?" "Seriously, with the potatoes," he said, not hiding his sarcasm. "Don't get smart with me, Miller. It's not plants you will be analyzing in Sector Gamma. It's a different sort of specimen." Her tone was clipped, clearly indicating she had no intention of elaborating further. "Just get here. Now." With a sigh that could have rivaled a Martian dust storm, David stood up, pushing back from his desk. He adjusted the worn fabric of his coveralls and headed for the door, a strange feeling of anticipation bubbling beneath his jaded exterior. He wasn't sure what he was about to walk into, but at this point, anything was better than staring at purple potatoes. He arrived at Sector Gamma and found a large, circular room with a massive central water tank. It was more like an aquarium, the humid air thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something oddly oceanic. His eyes immediately landed on the XYLR, now free from the soil analyzer but clearly displeased. It was taller than he'd estimated, maybe 7 feet, its skin now shifting from deep blues to angry reds. The large, expressive eyes fixed on him, and he couldn't deny the creature had a certain presence. "So," said Dr. Vance, materializing at his side, her expression as tight as a drum, "this is ZYLTH, a member of the XYLR Scientific Exchange Program. ZYLTH is currently in the process of adjusting to our environment, and we need someone with an understanding of botanical systems to help with its habitat." David blinked. "Me? I thought you just said something about equipment maintenance." That was a simplification. ZYLTH was attempting to analyze the soil in the hydroponics bay when it encountered some difficulties. Vance said, with a pointed glance to the XYLR. ZYLTH let out a series of clicks, which sounded suspiciously like disgruntled grumbling. David tentatively approached, feeling like he'd walked onto the set of a low-budget sci-fi movie. Hello," he said, feeling rather ridiculous. "I'm David." The XYLR tilted its large head, its iridescent skin shifting to a calmer, almost curious green. It let out another sequence of clicks and whistles, followed by a low, rumbling hum that vibrated through the floor. The sound sent a strange tingle through David's spine. "ZYLTH is attempting to communicate with you." Dr. Vance interjected as if she was reading from a textbook, "It's probably saying that your clothing lacks proper aesthetic appeal." David glanced down at his stained coveralls. "Well, I can't argue with that." He looked back at ZYLTH. "It's nice to meet you." He felt utterly ridiculous. Talking to a tentacled alien wasn't exactly part of his career plan. ZYLTH emitted a soft hum, its large eyes focused on David. David couldn't help but feel that he was being thoroughly examined, analyzed, and possibly found severely lacking. He had a sudden urge to check his zipper, just in case. "Right, Miller," Dr. Vance said, breaking the awkward silence, "you're going to be ZYLTH's, well, tutor. We need you to help it understand the human approach to botanical research. Try not to get eaten." She turned sharply on her heel and left, muttering something about needing a stronger drink. David stared at the retreating figure of the doctor, then back at ZYLTH, who was now emitting a slow, hypnotic pattern of blue and green light. He swallowed hard, a mix of dread and a strange sense of excitement settling in his stomach. He had a feeling his life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. "So," David said, addressing the alien, "shall we get started? I'm sure you're dying to talk more about Martian potatoes, and I, on the other hand, want to know if those tentacles are as dangerous as they look, especially if you have a bad day. Or is that a mating season thing?" he finished, instantly regretting his last remark. ZYLTH made a series of sounds that David interpreted as confusion and maybe a little amusement, and then it gestured with one tentacle toward a nearby datapad, displaying a series of complex diagrams. It seemed, despite its initial displeasure, that the tutoring session was about to begin. And David, for the first time in a long time, felt a strange flutter of anticipation. He was going to tutor a tentacled alien. What could possibly go wrong? The chapter ended with David staring at the datapad, feeling completely out of his depth, while ZYLTH regarded him with an expression that was impossible for him to interpret, yet he was unable to look away. The datapad in front of David was a chaotic mess of alien symbols and what appeared to be advanced mathematical equations. He squinted at the screen, his eyebrows furrowed in concentration. "Okay, so, if I'm reading this correctly, you're saying that Martian soil, resonates with the harmonic frequencies of star stuff?" he asked, feeling like he was simultaneously speaking English and gibberish. ZYLTH, who was floating serenely in the center of its large tank, let out a series of melodic clicks and whistles, and its skin shifted to a vibrant shade of emerald green. A single tentacle reached out, gently tapping the datapad, highlighting a particular cluster of symbols. David took a deep breath, trying to decode the alien's attempt at communication. "Right, star stuff it is," David muttered, rubbing his temples. He'd spent the better part of the last hour trying to understand ZYLTH's approach to botany, and all it had achieved was a mild headache and a profound sense of intellectual inadequacy. It was like trying to decipher a symphony with a pair of chopsticks. He had quickly discovered that the XYLA's communication was a complex mix of vocalizations, bioluminescent color shifts, and tactile gestures. ZYLTH seemed to understand human language on a basic level, but it was clear that their interpretation of words and concepts was different, to say the least. So, you're not just studying the plants, you're listening to them? David asked, feeling like he'd just stumbled into a New Age botanical seminar. ZYLTH let out a series of trills, and its bioluminescence pulsed with an almost rhythmic pattern, moving from green to blue to a deep, almost black-purple. David guessed that this meant yes, and also, you are utterly clueless. He decided to ignore the second part. Okay, I get it, he lied, hoping that ZYLTH wouldn't notice the complete lack of comprehension in his voice. It's all about the frequencies. The vibes, if you will. He cringed inwardly at his own words. He decided to try a different approach. He gestured to a nearby sample of Martian soil, the same kind he was growing those boring potatoes in. So, if we were to, say, analyze this using my method? How would that align with your star stuff philosophy? ZYLTH observed him for a moment, then extended a tentacle and gently picked up the soil sample, twirling it around in the air. It then emitted a high-pitched whistle followed by a series of rapid clicks. Its skin started to pulse with a warm, orange glow. Okay, let's see, what exactly are you feeling with that? David said, trying to keep his voice even despite the strange display. Is it a good star stuff, or a bad star stuff? The XYLA then extended a tentacle and gently tapped his hand. It was not a painful touch, it was more like a gentle pressure, a strange, soft sensation that made the hair on the back of David's neck stand up. ZYLTH then made another series of clicking noises. David tried to interpret the meaning. The best he could make of it was that the soil sample was interesting and connected to him. Connected to me? David asked, feeling a bit unnerved. Why would it be connected to me? ZYLTH seemed to consider this for a moment, then, to David's utter surprise, it extended another tentacle and gently touched his face, the soft, cool texture sending shivers down his spine. It lingered there for a moment, the gentle pressure sending a weird jolt through him. Okay, personal space? David said, trying to keep his voice steady. We're not quite at the touchy-feely stage of our relationship. Not that, you know. He stammered, feeling his cheeks flush. ZYLTH seemed to be amused, or at least, David was fairly sure that's what the rapid changes in the bioluminescence indicated. He had to admit that, despite his initial apprehension, ZYLTH was a strangely fascinating creature. Its movements were graceful and fluid, and its large, expressive eyes seemed to be constantly observing and learning. It was like working with a living, breathing work of art. A rather confusing work of art, but a work of art nonetheless. All right, he said, trying to regain control of the situation. Let's try something a bit more human. Let's look at the basic structure of plants, like the stem and the leaves. He pulled up a diagram of a plant cell, hoping that something about this would actually register with the alien. ZYLTH watched the diagram with its large eyes, its head tilted to one side, before emitting another series of clicks and whistles. Then, to David's surprise, it started making gestures with its tentacles. It mimicked the growth of a plant, slowly unfurling one tentacle to resemble a stem and then gracefully expanding several others to represent leaves. The display was mesmerizing, and David found himself staring at it with a sense of awe. He had to admit, this was way more interesting than his potato research. It was more interesting than anything he'd done in years. He even forgot about how awkward things were between them. Okay, that's actually really impressive. David said, his voice full of genuine wonder. You know, you make me feel like I've been wasting my time in the botany department. ZYLTH's bioluminescence shifted to a soft, warm gold color, which David interpreted as a sign of pleasure. So, David said, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and something he couldn't quite name. If we're done with plants, what else do XYLR do? Any other interesting alien hobbies? Like, do you have an alien version of chess? Or alien karaoke? ZYLTH let out a soft, melodic hum, then gestured with a tentacle towards a large, metallic door in the far corner of the room. David had never noticed it before, but now that he did, he was filled with the desire to open that mysterious portal. "What's that?" he asked, his hand almost outstretched to open the door. The alien emitted a series of clicks and whistles, its skin shimmering with a complex pattern of blues and greens. Then, it gently pulled David in the direction of the door, its tentacle wrapping around his arm with a strange, but not unpleasant pressure. "Oh, so this is not just research, it's a guided tour now?" David joked, his heart beating a bit faster than it should. The touch of ZYLTH felt both alien and strangely inviting. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a large, cavernous space filled with pools of water and strange, bioluminescent flora. The air was thick with humidity, the smell of the ocean, and something else, something almost intoxicating. David realized that this was ZYLTH's personal habitat, a hidden sanctuary within the research base. "Whoa," David whispered, his voice filled with awe. The room was like something out of a dream, a vibrant underwater world hidden behind a simple door. ZYLTH swam into the room and then turned its body towards David, beckoning him with a soft hum and its eyes fixated on him. It was an invitation, and despite his apprehension, David knew that he couldn't resist. He stepped through the door, the humid air enveloping him like a warm embrace. The room itself felt like a different dimension. It was beautiful, surreal, and it seemed to be pulsating with a gentle, almost sexual energy. As he stepped into the room, he was no longer the tired botanist, tending to his boring potatoes. He was David, stepping into a new world, and he couldn't help the feeling that something very strange and very exciting was about to happen. This was a whole new level of awkward, and he had a very strong feeling that this was just the beginning of it. The chapter ended with David standing inside the habitat of the alien, the lights of its personal world illuminating them both, ZYLTH now shifting into a deeper shade of purple, and the strange pressure in his chest telling him that this was not just a botanical exchange anymore. The humid air of ZYLTH's habitat was thick and heavy, clinging to David's skin like a damp blanket. He stood on the edge of the main pool, his shoes already slightly soaked, observing the alien with a growing sense of bewilderment. ZYLTH was swimming in circles, its bioluminescence shifting erratically between deep blues and vibrant purples, a display that David found both beautiful and unsettling. The soft, rhythmic humming that emanated from the XYLR was starting to sound less like a pleasant melody and more like an urgent, pulsating alarm. "Okay, so, you're clearly not studying plant frequencies anymore," David said, trying to keep his voice light despite the growing unease in his gut. He had spent a lot of time with ZYLTH and had become more comfortable, but something was definitely different today. "Is this some sort of alien happy dance? Did you find a really good patch of the star stuff?" ZYLTH responded with a series of rapid clicks and whistles, accompanied by a sharp, almost piercing tone that echoed through the habitat. Its body moved with an increased intensity, the tentacles now flailing in the water with a strange, almost frantic energy. It then lunged towards him, stopping just inches away from his face. David jumped back, his heart pounding in his chest. "Whoa. Personal space, remember? We talked about that. Are you feeling okay? Did you have some bad alien space food?" He was joking, trying to play it cool, but his body was on high alert, his senses screaming that this was not normal behavior. ZYLTH let out a series of soft, rumbling hums, its bioluminescence shifting to an intense shade of deep blue. It extended a tentacle, gently touching David's chest. The contact sent a jolt through him, like a small electrical shock. David realized that these touches were becoming less innocent, more deliberate. The touch of ZYLTH was almost like a brand. "Okay," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What's with all the touching? Is this some kind of XYLR greeting?" Or are you just practicing your tentacle foo? He had the distinct feeling that he was walking into territory he didn't quite understand, and it was both exciting and terrifying. Just then, his wrist device buzzed, the screen flashing an incoming call from Dr. Vance. David hesitated, wondering if he should ignore it. But the buzzing was insistent, and with a sigh, he answered the call. "Miller, are you in the habitat with ZYLTH?" Dr. Vance's voice was sharp and demanding. Yeah, David replied, glancing nervously at the XYLR, who was now staring intensely at him. "Is there a problem?" "There is a significant biological anomaly with ZYLTH. Its behavior is deviating from the expected parameters," Vance said, a hint of panic in her voice. "I am sending you the data now. Read it. Understand it. And then get the hell out of there." The call disconnected, and David's device beeped, displaying a rapidly loading document. He quickly skimmed through the text, his eyes widening with each new piece of information. He read words like mating season, hormonal surges, and increased tactile behavior, all associated with a chart that made his head spin. He quickly scanned the document again. ZYLTH's mating season happened once every 5 Earth years. And it was happening now. "Oh, for the love of," David groaned, finally understanding the strange shift in ZYLTH's behavior. "So, it's not space food, it's that kind of biology." "Seriously?" He looked at ZYLTH, who was now swirling in the water, its bioluminescence pulsing in a pattern that David now recognized as a kind of visual mating display. "And you're doing this, to me?" he asked, incredulity creeping into his voice. ZYLTH let out a series of low, almost seductive hums and extended another tentacle, which this time gently caressed his cheek. The sensation sent a wave of heat through him, and he had a sudden urge to back away. Okay, I understand. Mating season. Hormones. I get it. Completely normal. Absolutely no reason to panic, David said, mostly to himself. Except that I'm me. A human. And you're a very attractive, very tentacled alien. He backed away further, his eyes fixed on the XYLR. Look, ZYLTH, I'm flattered, really, but I don't think this is going to work. I am, for all intents and purposes, just a botanist. ZYLTH seemed to ignore his words. Instead, it started emitting a series of high-pitched trills, its skin shifting to a shade of vibrant, almost electric blue. It then approached him with a speed that was both graceful and terrifying. It stopped an inch away, its large eyes fixed on David's. David tried to remain calm, but a part of him was panicking. This was a completely absurd situation. He was trapped in an alien's love nest, being courted by a creature whose biology was a complete mystery to him. And, if he was being completely honest with himself, he was also a little bit intrigued. Right, so, what exactly are you expecting? David asked, trying to maintain a semblance of control. Do you want me to sing you a love song? Do a mating dance? What is the protocol here? As if in response, ZYLTH let out another series of soft hums, then reached out and gently pulled David towards it, its tentacles wrapping around his body in a way that was both surprisingly strong and strangely gentle. David gasped, his breath caught in his throat, as he found himself being pulled into the pool. The water was warm and surprisingly comfortable, and as he sank into its depths, he felt ZYLTH's body surrounding him, its smooth, cool skin a stark contrast to his own. The bioluminescent patterns of the alien were all around him, creating an underwater light show that was both beautiful and disorienting. David felt a strange rush, a combination of panic and exhilaration, and he realized that he was in way over his head, literally and figuratively. He tried to speak, to object, to tell the XYLR that this was a terrible idea, but the words seemed to be stuck in his throat. He was lost in the moment, in the strange, seductive pull of the alien, and for a fleeting moment, he forgot all about his boring life, the potatoes, the red dust of Mars. He was just David, floating in an alien's mating pool, and he had a feeling that things were about to get very, very interesting. Or incredibly awkward? Probably both. The chapter ended with David submerged in the pool, surrounded by ZYLTH's glowing tentacles, and realizing that the mating season was not just a scientific anomaly, it was a full-blown, tentacled, totally out of his depth crisis that he was now somehow in the middle of. The warm, salty water enveloped David, the gentle currents created by ZYLTH's movement swirling around him. He tried to stay calm, to process what was happening, but the combination of the alien's proximity, the rhythmic hums, and the intoxicating bioluminescence was making it increasingly difficult to think straight. It was like being trapped in a sensual, underwater kaleidoscope. "Okay," David said, his voice slightly muffled by the water, This is not ideal. I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to be part of your mating rituals. I'm just a botanist. Remember the potatoes? The boring potatoes?" ZYLTH responded with a soft series of clicks, and its bioluminescence shifted to a warm, inviting shade of gold. It moved closer, its tentacles caressing his body with a delicate pressure. David couldn't deny the strange, almost pleasant sensation, but he knew he needed to maintain some semblance of control. "Look," he said, trying to push back a bit, "I appreciate the attention, but I think you're misunderstanding. I'm human. And you're not. We're different species. Different plumbing, different reproductive systems. This is not going to work. It's like trying to mate a goldfish with a toaster." ZYLTH tilted its head, its large eyes fixed on him, as if trying to understand his complicated explanation. It then emitted a low, rumbling hum that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. David suspected it was saying something along the lines of "you talk too much," or maybe "toasters are illogical." He had to admit, the whole experience was surreal. He had come to Mars to escape the chaos of Earth, to find a quiet place to be bored, and he had somehow stumbled into an interspecies mating ritual with a gorgeous, tentacled alien. His life was officially a science fiction movie. He decided that he needed a different approach. He tried to gather his thoughts, to rationalize this absurd situation. "Okay, ZYLTH," he said, taking a deep breath, "let's think logically. We have a significant cultural and biological barrier here. You're a highly intelligent, aquatic species with a complex mating system. I'm a human with a slightly messy apartment and a penchant for caffeine. We're not exactly a match made in the cosmic heavens." He paused, looking directly into the alien's eyes. "I mean, I like you, ZYLTH. You're fascinating, intelligent, and you have a really cool light show. But this?" He gestured between them. This is probably a bad idea." ZYLTH seemed to consider his words for a moment, then it extended a tentacle, gently tracing the line of his jaw. The contact was warm, soft, and, despite his best efforts, David couldn't help but feel a shiver run through him. The alien emitted a series of low, almost seductive hums, its bioluminescence shifting to a deep, pulsing purple. "Oh, come on!" David groaned. "Are you doing that on purpose? Are you trying to drive me insane?" He knew he was being irrational. He knew he should probably get out of the pool, find Dr. Vance, and demand a transfer to another planet. But a part of him, a very small, very stupid, and very curious part of him, was starting to wonder what would happen if he didn't. "Okay," he said, his voice a bit lower, a bit more hesitant, let's just try to understand each other. I'll try to learn more about XYLR mating rituals, and you try to understand that I'm not exactly built for tentacle-based intimacy." He realized he was talking to a sentient being that probably understood more about the universe than he did, and it was all very absurd. Still, he had to try. He needed to understand what was happening, even if he didn't like it. ZYLTH seemed to respond to his words, its bioluminescence dimming slightly, shifting to a calmer shade of green. It let out a series of softer hums and then swam towards the edge of the pool, gesturing towards a series of holographic displays that he hadn't noticed before. They seemed to show detailed images of XYLR anatomy and mating behaviors. David swam closer, his curiosity piqued. "All right," he said, let's see what we're dealing with here. As he looked at the images, he felt his cheeks flush. The XYLR mating process was complex. It involved intricate rituals, pheromonal exchanges, and a degree of physical intimacy that made his human sensibilities feel distinctly inadequate. And the diagrams were extremely graphic. Okay, David muttered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and mortification, so, this is quite a lot. He then noticed something else. The diagrams seemed to indicate that XYLR mating preferences were not as fixed as he thought. The images showed XYLR pairing with other species, including ones that were distinctly not aquatic. He looked back at ZYLTH, who was observing him intently, its large eyes filled with a strange mix of curiosity and something else that David couldn't quite decipher. Could it be longing? No, that was ridiculous. He was projecting. He needed to stop projecting. Okay, so I'm guessing this is not exactly a one-size-fits-all situation? David asked, feeling like he was wading into a whole new level of awkwardness. ZYLTH responded with a series of soft clicks and whistles, its skin shimmering with a delicate pattern of light. It then extended a tentacle and gently touched David's hand, the sensation sending a strange jolt through his arm. Look, David said, his voice barely a whisper, I'm still very confused. But I'm trying. I'm really trying. And if you think that I am going to participate in a fully tentacled alien mating ritual after reading that stuff, I think you need to adjust the algorithm. ZYLTH moved closer, its large eyes fixed on his, and then it did something that David did not expect. It leaned closer, its beak-like mouth almost touching his. For a moment, David thought it was going to kiss him, and he couldn't deny the strange flutter of anticipation that went through him. Instead, it emitted a soft hum, almost a purr, and gently rubbed its head against his cheek. David froze, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a gesture that felt both intimate and almost affectionate. It was definitely a signal. And it was leaving him even more confused than before. Was this some sort of alien foreplay? Was he supposed to purr back? What exactly was the etiquette here? He looked at ZYLTH, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and a growing sense of something else, something that felt suspiciously like attraction. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. This was madness. Utter madness. And yet, he couldn't help but be curious. The chapter ended with David staring at ZYLTH, a mixture of confusion, fear, and an undeniable spark of something else, swirling inside him, as he realized that his life as a boring botanist was officially over and he had completely no clue where this was all going to lead. The morning after his underwater revelation, David found himself in a strange state of limbo. He was back in his lab, surrounded by the same purple potatoes, but everything felt different. The sterile environment of the research base seemed muted, almost lifeless compared to the vibrant, sensual world of ZYLTH's habitat. He kept replaying the events of the previous night in his mind, the image of the alien's large, expressive eyes and the gentle pressure of its tentacles a constant, distracting presence. He knew that he had to talk to someone, to get some perspective on the situation, but the thought of explaining his predicament to Dr. Vance filled him with a sense of dread. So, Dr. Vance, I think I'm being seduced by a tentacled alien. Any advice? Yeah, that wasn't going to go well. He was interrupted from his internal debate by his wrist device, which beeped with an incoming message. It was from Dr. Lena Hansen, another botanist at the base, and someone he considered to be a friend, or at least as close to a friend as one could get on a remote Mars base. David, can you meet me in the hydroponics bay? Something weird is going on, the message read. David sighed. Just what he needed, more weirdness. He decided to get out of his lab before he started talking to the potatoes. He made his way to the hydroponics bay, where he found Lena examining a series of mutated plants, her brow furrowed in concern. What's up? David asked, trying to sound casual. Look at these, Lena said, gesturing towards the plants. They're changing. They're growing faster, the colors are more vibrant, and they have these strange, bioluminescent patterns. David frowned, examining the plants more closely. He realized that Lena was right, these were not normal. They looked almost like something out of ZYLTH's habitat. That's weird, he said, trying to mask his surprise. Maybe it's a nutrient imbalance? Lena shook her head. I've run all the tests. The nutrient levels are perfect. It's like they're responding to something. Something that's making them bloom. David had a terrible feeling that he knew what was making them bloom. He glanced around nervously, hoping that ZYLTH wasn't close enough to hear the conversation. He had a feeling that its pheromones were making their way through the base, influencing the plants, and possibly something else. Look, David said, deciding to be as vague as possible, sometimes plants do weird stuff. It's just botany. Lena raised an eyebrow. Since when are you okay with plants doing weird stuff? You're usually all about the precise scientific method. David hesitated. I've been experimenting with new methods, he said, trying to sound confident. I'm trying to think outside the box. Lena looked at him skeptically, her eyes narrowed. What kind of methods, exactly? Before David could come up with a plausible answer, his wrist device beeped again, this time with an urgent message from Dr. Vance. Miller, report to my office immediately. We have a situation. David groaned, feeling like he was being summoned to the principal's office. I have to go, he said to Lena. We'll talk later about plant weirdness. He could feel her gaze on his back as he left the hydroponics bay. He walked quickly to Dr. Vance's office, his heart pounding in his chest. He had a feeling that whatever situation she was about to tell him about, it wasn't going to be good. He found Dr. Vance looking at a series of complex diagrams on her monitor, her expression tight and serious. We have a problem, Miller, she said, without any preamble. Dr. Ramirez, from the Alien Communication Department, has been poking around ZYLTH's data, and he's raised concerns about its behavior. He suspects we're not getting the full picture. David felt a knot form in his stomach. Dr. Ramirez was known for his obsessive attention to detail and his unwavering commitment to protocol, which meant that he was the worst possible person to have suspicions about ZYLTH. What kind of concerns? David asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He says that ZYLTH's bioluminescence patterns and vocalizations are inconsistent with the initial data, Vance explained. He's questioning whether the XYLR is behaving as we expect it to. David knew what she was really saying. He knew that Dr. Ramirez was close to figuring out that ZYLTH was going through its mating season, and that David himself was possibly the subject of its attention. He's looking into the pheromone data, she continued, her eyes narrowing, and he's asking some very pointed questions about your involvement. My involvement? David asked, trying to sound innocent. I'm just a botanist. I'm just helping with its habitat. Don't play coy with me, Miller. You've been spending an awful lot of time with the alien. And let's just say that the readings in your lab have become unusual. Especially the humidity levels. David felt his face flush. She knew. She definitely knew. Or at least, she suspected something. He had to play it cool. He had to come up with some kind of explanation. Look, Dr. Vance, ZYLTH is a complex creature. Its behavior is unusual. I'm trying to understand it, to better tailor its habitat to its specific needs, he said, trying to sound scientific and professional. I'm just being thorough. Dr. Vance studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Be very careful, Miller, she said, her voice low and serious. Dr. Ramirez is going to be looking into this very closely. If he uncovers anything irregular, it won't just be bad for you, it'll be disastrous for the entire research program. I understand, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. He left her office feeling like he had a target on his back, and all because of a horny tentacled alien. Back in his lab, David tried to think. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. He realized that his carefully constructed world of boredom was about to implode, and he had no one to blame but himself, and maybe, just a little bit, ZYLTH. Just as he was formulating a strategy, his wrist device beeped again. It was a message from ZYLTH. It was a short series of clicks and whistles, accompanied by a bioluminescent pattern that David had learned to recognize. It was an invitation. He hesitated. He knew he should ignore it. He knew he should stay away from ZYLTH, at least until he could figure out a way to navigate this situation. But the pull of the alien was too strong. He couldn't resist. Okay, universe, he muttered to himself, let's do this. He was stepping into the unknown again, and he knew that he was playing a dangerous game. He made his way to the habitat, his heart racing with a mix of fear, excitement, and the overwhelming feeling that his life was now a never-ending series of awkward, tentacle-related crises. The chapter ended with David approaching ZYLTH's habitat, the humid air heavy with the promise of more strange and possibly disastrous encounters, knowing he was caught between the research base and the alien, and his biggest secret was about to be discovered, making him wonder how long he could keep the two sides apart. David slipped into ZYLTH's habitat, the warm, salty air a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the research base. ZYLTH was waiting for him, its bioluminescence pulsing with a mix of blues and purples, a display that David had come to associate with with intent. The alien swam gracefully towards him, its large, expressive eyes fixed on his, and David couldn't help but feel a strange mix of nervousness and exhilaration. "Hey," David said, trying to sound casual, but his voice betrayed his unease. "So, what's the emergency? Did you discover a new type of star stuff? Or is this another mating season thing?" ZYLTH responded with a series of clicks and whistles, followed by a soft, melodic hum. It then gestured towards a holographic display, which showed a series of complex diagrams and sensor readings. David frowned, studying the data. "Okay, so, what is this?" David asked, not understanding what he was looking at. ZYLTH extended a tentacle and tapped the screen, highlighting a particular set of readings. It was showing activity outside of the base. "Someone is close." "What? Who's close? Are we talking about Dr. Ramirez and his pheromone tests?" David asked, feeling a knot of panic forming in his stomach. ZYLTH shook its large head, its bioluminescence shifting to a warning shade of red. It then displayed a series of images, showing a small, heavily armed spacecraft approaching the base. It was not human, it was something else. "Oh, for the love of, who are they?" David muttered. "Are they after you? Is this some kind of intergalactic repo situation?" ZYLTH let out a sharp, almost urgent trill and then started making gestures towards the center of the habitat, indicating the large water tank. David had a feeling that it was telling him to hide. "Right, so, hide in the giant aquarium, got it," David said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Because that's not going to look suspicious at all." But he knew that they didn't have much time to waste. He had to figure out a way to protect ZYLTH and himself without raising any more suspicion from Dr. Ramirez or anyone else. He quickly formulated a plan, a bizarre, almost insane plan, but it was the best he could come up with. "Okay, ZYLTH, David said, his voice firm despite the tremor of fear running through him. "Here's the plan. We're going to do what I call the Tyrannosaurus Rex protocol. It's unorthodox, but it's the only way I can think of." ZYLTH tilted its head, its large eyes fixed on him, waiting for an explanation. "Okay, so, here's the deal," David said, starting to pace back and forth. "We need to make the base look like it's completely deserted. Like everyone just up and left in a hurry. We'll disable the external sensors, create a distraction, and then, we hide." ZYLTH emitted a series of questioning clicks, its bioluminescence shifting between greens and blues. "I know, it sounds crazy, but trust me," David said, "humans are easily confused by a good old-fashioned distraction. And the Tyrannosaurus Rex part? Well, that's just for fun. With ZYLTH's help, David started implementing his plan. The first step was to disable the external sensors, which was surprisingly easy for the alien to do with its advanced technology. Then, they created a series of holographic projections, which were designed to make the base appear as if it was in a state of emergency. David even threw in a few images of simulated explosions, for dramatic effect. "Okay, that looks suitably chaotic," David said, examining the holographic chaos on the monitor. "Now, for the Tyrannosaurus Rex part." He then grabbed a portable speaker and connected it to his wrist device. He scrolled through his music library and found what he was looking for, a recording of very loud, very impressive dinosaur roars. He played the sound at full volume, the loud noises echoing through the bass. "Okay, that's unexpected, isn't it?" David said, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction at his bizarre plan. "Now, time to hide. Let's go." He grabbed ZYLTH's tentacle, which felt strangely comforting in his hand, and they headed for the main water tank, where they submerged themselves, the simulated chaos raging around them. As they settled in the water, David looked at ZYLTH. Its skin was pulsing with a mix of blues and greens, its large eyes fixed on him with a look of both apprehension and trust. "So, how do I look?" David asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Do I make a good distraction? Am I worthy of being a love interest to a tentacled alien?" ZYLTH let out a soft, melodic hum and gently nudged his cheek with its head. David felt his heart skip a beat. It was a small gesture, but it felt incredibly intimate, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of warmth spread through his body. Just then, the outer doors of the base opened, and David could hear the sounds of the approaching spacecraft. He held his breath, his hand tightening around ZYLTH's tentacle, as he waited for the next act of their very strange and increasingly dangerous adventure. They had to stay hidden, and they had to trust in his ridiculous, chaotic plan. He was sure that Dr. Ramirez, or even Dr. Vance, would never believe that he managed to convince an alien that the most secure base on Mars could be tricked with holographic explosions and a recording of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The chapter ended with David and ZYLTH submerged in the water tank, surrounded by the simulated chaos of the Tyrannosaurus Rex protocol, as the unknown spacecraft landed on the base, and David realized that the fate of the research facility, and probably his own, now rested on his ability to convincingly fake a dinosaur attack, and a surprisingly strong feeling of connection to a tentacled alien. The silence that followed the landing of the alien spacecraft was thick and heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the base's life support systems and the rhythmic pulsing of ZYLTH's bioluminescence. David held his breath, his hand still tightly gripping the alien's tentacle, as they remained hidden in the depths of the water tank. He could hear the muffled sounds of the aliens moving through the base, their voices a series of guttural clicks and whistles that were completely alien to his ears. "Okay, so, they're definitely not from Earth," David whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. "And they definitely don't seem to appreciate my taste in music." He was still clutching the portable speaker in his hand, as if it was a lucky charm. "I guess the Tyrannosaurus Rex wasn't quite the intergalactic distraction I thought it would be." ZYLTH responded with a soft, almost soothing hum and gently nudged his cheek with its head, a gesture that was starting to feel strangely comforting. David couldn't deny the growing sense of connection he felt with the alien. Despite the absurdity of the situation, there was a strange kind of intimacy forming between them, a connection that transcended language and species. "Right, so what do we do now?" David muttered to himself. "We can't stay here forever." He glanced at the holographic displays, which were still showing the simulated chaos he'd created, and an idea started to form in his mind. It was crazy, it was risky, but it was the only chance they had. "ZYLTH, he whispered, his eyes fixed on the alien, "we need to get them away from the habitat, away from the research base. We need to create a bigger distraction, one that will lead them away from what they want." ZYLTH seemed to understand, its bioluminescence shifting to a pattern of blues and greens, indicating its agreement. It extended a tentacle and tapped David's hand, a gesture that he now recognized as a sign of trust. With ZYLTH's help, David began to implement his new plan. First, they used ZYLTH's technology to create a series of sonic distortions, designed to disrupt the alien sensors and communication systems. Then, they activated the holographic projections again, but this time, they focused on creating a trail of simulated energy readings that led away from the main base. "Okay, that should look like something worth investigating," David said, his voice filled with a mix of nervous anticipation and a strange sense of excitement. Now, for the hard part. He took a deep breath and looked at ZYLTH. "We need to go outside, we need to lead them away, and for this to work, you need to trust me, okay?" ZYLTH responded with a series of soft, melodic hums and gently touched his face with one of its tentacles. David took the gesture as a yes. With ZYLTH by his side, they cautiously left the water tank, making their way through the base, avoiding the areas where the aliens seemed to be congregating. They eventually reached the hydroponics bay, which was still filled with the bioluminescent plants that had been affected by ZYLTH's pheromones. "Okay, this is it," David whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. "This is where we make our stand. Or, our run, actually." He activated a series of hidden controls, which caused the plants to start emitting a vibrant, pulsating light, creating a dazzling display of color and energy. It was almost like a disco, if that disco was filled with alien plants. "Let's hope they're into this sort of thing," David said, grabbing ZYLTH's tentacle. He could feel the warmth of the alien skin, and he found himself strangely calmed by the touch. Together, they burst out of the hydroponics bay, their presence immediately detected by the aliens. The pursuit was on. They ran, their steps echoing through the corridors, while the holographic trail guided their pursuers away from the main base. As they moved through the corridors, ZYLTH's bioluminescence pulsed around them, creating a strange and beautiful display of light and color. David had a strange sensation of being lost in the world of the alien, with the two of them being an inseparable entity, just two people, two beings, running away from the danger together. They eventually reached an emergency exit, which led to an open space outside of the base. The Martian landscape stretched before them, the red dust swirling in the wind. It was a stark contrast to the controlled environment of the base, but for David, it felt like freedom. "Okay, this is it," David said, turning to face ZYLTH. "We need to lure them away, into the desert. And trust me on this, they will not expect us to run straight." With ZYLTH by his side, they ran through the Martian landscape, the sounds of the pursuing aliens echoing behind them. They ran faster than David ever thought was possible. And it was then, between the holographic simulation, the alien pursuit, and the intense moment, he realized something that made him smile. He wasn't running because of fear, he was running because he didn't want to lose what he had created in the last few days. He didn't want to lose ZYLTH. The chase continued, until finally, they reached the top of a small, rocky hill. David paused, catching his breath, and turned to face ZYLTH, who was glowing with a vibrant mix of blues and purples. Their eyes met, and David felt a surge of emotion, a combination of relief, gratitude, and something that he now recognized as love. "We did it," David said, his voice barely a whisper. "We actually did it." ZYLTH responded with a series of soft, melodic hums and gently nudged his cheek with its head, its bioluminescence pulsing with warmth and affection. David couldn't resist. He reached out and gently touched the alien's face, feeling the smooth, cool texture of its skin. The moment was both tender and incredibly powerful. He leaned closer, their faces inches apart, and, for the first time, he closed the distance between them. The kiss was soft, gentle, and completely unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It was a mix of alien and human, a testament to the strange and beautiful connection that they had forged. He was still an out-of-shape, middle-aged botanist on Mars, and yet, he was also in the middle of the most intense and fulfilling relationship he could ever imagine. The idea was completely absurd, but also incredibly right. The chapter ended with David and ZYLTH kissing under the red Martian sky, the sounds of the pursuing aliens fading in the distance, as they both knew that they were facing an uncertain future, but at that moment, in that strange and beautiful place, they knew that they were together, and that was enough.